I'll be the first to admit, I have never been as off about a guy's ceiling in the NBA as I have been about Jalen Brunson. Like, I saw Jalen Brunson a ton in college. Saw him play on the big stage in the Big East tournament, was always great under pressure. JJ, I never thought Jalen Brunson could be a 25-point scorer per game in the NBA.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, and I'll be honest with you, Jalen. When I was your teammate in Dallas, I thought you were a fantastic player. I didn't see this level of play coming.
Out of all the players in the NBA, I don't know if there's anybody who embodies the true meaning of what it is to be an underdog better than Jalen Brunson. There's been a lot of conversation recently about whether Brunson is really a 1A caliber player, and this conversation came as a result of some comments that Becky Hammon made about him.
They're a pretty good team, they're well coached, they're going to be on their defensive game, but at the end of the day, they don't have a dude. You got to have a dude, you got to have a 1A dude, and they're missing that. Sorry.
I didn't want to disagree with Becky today, but they do have their dude.
Who?
Jalen Brunson.
No, he's too small. If your best player is small, you're not winning. John Stockton, Allen Iverson, Steve Nash, you could go down the list.
But when you consider that Brunson is a guy who was drafted in the second round and a bench player for about half of his career, you find that the fact that we're having this debate about him is actually pretty impressive. But nonetheless, despite statistically being one of the best point guards, many still question whether he belongs in the elite class of players in the league, which, though a little bit disrespectful, is nothing new to him. In today's NBA, the New York Knicks are seen by many as a top 5 team in the East when healthy, with the potential to end up in the Eastern Conference Finals. And a huge reason for that is Jalen Brunson, who has seemingly brought the franchise back to life after the team's long losing history that seemed more like a curse than a bad stretch. Prior to signing Brunson in the 2021 offseason, the Knicks had been to the playoffs just 5 times since the year 2001, and in that stretch, they only made it past the first round once in 2013 with a roster that's now completely retired. They had suffered 17 losing seasons in 20 years, so the Knicks were desperate for wins and desperate for superstars. But despite having the largest market in the NBA, they had failed to attract big names, and when it came to the draft, they somehow managed to fumble every year, often in the lottery where they picked up players who were usually out of the organization by the end of their rookie contracts. But in this short Jalen Brunson era, the Knicks are on pace to make the playoffs for a second season in a row, and even though the team has had their share of struggles this season, mainly with injuries, they have in every way exceeded the expectations that many had for them when Brunson first signed with them 2 seasons ago. I'm not sure how many of you remember this, but him signing with the Knicks was a move that was ridiculed, or at least questioned by a large majority of people in the NBA world, some of whom now seem to be on the Knicks train in a sequence of events that deserves a rewind on how Jalen Brunson became the NBA's best underdog. Be sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Let's see if we can get 300 likes on this one. Now let's get into it.
Listen, the Knicks are so desperate to be relevant that you can't kill them. But Jalen Brunson's a nice player, and I know he played great against Utah. But, I mean, do we think Brunson is a guy that is going to bring them to a second-round playoff series? He's not. So I understand it. Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, he's not like, if he was a transitional, big-time alpha dog player who you know could be a big piece to a championship, you can see it. He's not that.
Jalen Brunson signing with the Knicks was met with a lot of criticism, and as I'm about to show you, it all stemmed from the belief that Brunson just wasn't good enough to be the guy that the Knicks needed. One way we know this is through the reaction to the heavy recruiting that was seen from the Knicks organization. In June of 2022, the team hired Jalen Brunson's father, Rick Brunson, as an assistant coach, and the man who was responsible for hiring him was Knicks president Leon Rose, who is also Jalen Brunson's former agent. Hiring Rick Brunson was seen as an attempt to lure Jalen to the organization, and to add to that, a couple of Knicks executives, along with Julius Randle, were taking it a step further and attending Mavs playoffs games in what looked like the most obvious recruiting move for a guy who was coming off of his best season, averaging 16 points and nearly 5 assists. Was a player like Jalen Brunson really worth that kind of treatment? Many didn't seem to think so.
You creating this cap space and all of this stuff to get Jalen Brunson. Is he KD? Is he Kawhi Leonard? I mean, Jalen Brunson's a damn good player. I'll be happy to have him. But all of this stuff you're going to because you're selling New York on Jalen Brunson.
In hindsight, the part that seemed to anger fans the most was the fact that even with all the cap space and assets that the Knicks had, and out of all the superstar players that they could have tried to attract, they were focusing their energy on acquiring Brunson. Some of the names that were floating around that time included DeJounte Murray, Donovan Mitchell, and some rumors about Zion Williamson, but the Knicks were really going after Jalen Brunson. If anything, it seemed to many like the Knicks had failed to land a desirable star, so they settled for whatever they could get. And what made it seem worse was the fact that the Knicks president was a person who had been previously linked to Jalen Brunson, so it seemed more like friends working out a business deal through a franchise that already had a history of bad signings. But like I mentioned already, at the heart of the anger was the belief that Jalen Brunson just wasn't good enough to help the Knicks make the kind of leap that they needed to, the way other superstars would have. The big question of whether Brunson was a guy who could elevate the level of play for the New York Knicks wasn't even really a question.
More than ever before, the Knicks are always going to be a franchise at a crossroads because they overinflate the expectations of players that aren't superstar players. He's a nice player, Jalen Brunson. Is he a difference maker? No. The Knicks are basically telling everybody, this is our big free agent signing because they know, Wendy, they can't get anybody else.
Maybe.
With all this, I hope you can see why I'm referring to Brunson as an underdog, because by definition, an underdog is someone who is expected to lose or struggle in a contest, or just a person who is always counted out. And Brunson's arrival to the Knicks was marked with so much doubt that what he's managed to do in these 2 seasons makes him seem like an overachiever. Today, Brunson is an all-star, potentially an all-NBA player, and has grown in popularity with fans and some of the media, but during that off-season when he signed with the Knicks, there was a lot of conversation about the true value of Jalen Brunson as a player, not just among Knicks fans, but around the league as well. In his last season with Dallas, it became clear that the Mavericks just weren't sure how much Brunson was worth, and they made it a point to really get an answer to that question. Going into that season, Jalen Brunson was eligible for a 4-year, $55 million extension, and his camp actually requested it at the beginning of the season, but at the time, the Mavs just weren't sure if he was worth that money. So they decided to wait and see how his season would progress before offering him that contract. That amount sounds like a generational steal for the kind of player we now know Brunson to be, but initially, even he wasn't trying to gamble on the contract situation.
It's funny because my agent was like, man, you can do so much, you can get more. I'm saying like, well, like I want to be safe. Like, I'm not trying to gamble right now. This is not something you really gamble with if it's out there.
Right.
And so, but they were like, we want to see where we're at, you know.
What Dallas didn't foresee, however, was a Luka injury that kept him out for 10 games and sparked an improvement in Brunson's play. Brunson, who was averaging 14 points and 4 assists before the injury, saw his numbers jump to 21 points and 7 assists in 10 games. Following that stretch, Brunson was moved from the bench and he became a permanent starter on the team, but the organization still wasn't willing to give him $55 million.
And I was playing really well. I think I was averaging like 20 and like 6 maybe, whatever. And so it was about that 20-25 mark. And so we went back, we're like, hey, like, if the deal's there, we're thinking about it. Like, I'll do it, like right now. Still, it was no. Like, it wasn't a hard no, it was just like, we want to see. So I'm like,
this was Dallas?
This is Dallas. This is still in Dallas.
That decision by the Mavs turned out to be a huge mistake on their part because Brunson becoming a starter freed him up to take his game to another level, and league executives were watching. He was on an upward trajectory, and after the trade deadline, it became clear that the best thing for him to do was to become an unrestricted free agent who could sign with any team for the best deal available. So when the Mavs finally offered him the $55 million, Brunson and his agent knew that he was worth more, and they turned it down. The doubts and concerns that the Mavs front office had about him proved to be unreasonable because just a few months after they had challenged him to prove his value, he showed that he was potentially worth double of what they had thought in the first place, and he was just getting started.
Did you have any idea Jalen Brunson would be this good?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Why?
When the playoffs rolled around, the 4th seed Mavs matched up against the Jazz, but they were without Luka, who was dealing with a left calf injury. In game 1 of that series, the Mavs lost at home, which is never good for any team in the playoffs, and there were talks about potentially having Luka back earlier than anticipated if the Mavs lost game 2. But in the next game, Brunson led the team to victory after a 41-point effort, which also allowed Luka to get the required recovery time. That was followed by a 31-point performance, which helped the Mavs to get a win on the road and put them up 2-1 in the series without Luka.
I would say one game that really was impressive on that playoff run. We lose the first game against Utah. So that second game, I mean, if we lost that second game, it would be tough to come back. We 0-2. And then we have 2 in Utah. So The second game, I think he had like 45, something like that. Like it was a tough game, and we needed to win no matter what. And that game was really impressive. I was just on the bench watching, like, wow, this guy's amazing.
A second option who can take on the scoring burden when needed to is one of the most rare assets in the NBA, and it looked like the Mavs had found that in Jalen Brunson. That team was without a question Luka's team, but it had a historic run in hindsight, and Brunson had a pretty significant imprint on it. For starters, when the Utah Jazz lost to Dallas, it brought them to an end of the Mitchell-Gobert era and ushered them into a full rebuild. And in the series that followed, we know how that went because it broke the Phoenix Suns so bad that the team was never the same and it was dismantled not long after. Say all you want, but Brunson was a significant part in that series as Luka's Robin for most of the games. And as you saw, Luka gave him his props and knew that Jalen Brunson wasn't just any other role player on the team. That playoff performance from Brunson played to the Mavs' detriment because the whole NBA world saw just how good he was and his value had increased tremendously. And despite a promise from Mark Cuban to match Brunson's best offer, he didn't. I'm not sure if this was a case of pride getting in the way or if Mark Cuban truly felt like the Mavs could land a better player than Brunson, but it was clear that the organization didn't think that Jalen Brunson was worth over $100 million. But it wasn't just the Mavs who felt this way. His value had doubled, and the money that the Knicks were offering him would eventually make him the 14th highest paid point guard in the league and the 46th highest paid player overall, which some fans and media generally saw as an issue for a guy who had been a bench player until that Luka injury in the middle of the season.
It's an awful idea. The Jalen Brunson sweepstakes. Is he one of the 40 best players in the league? I haven't made the updated list. Maybe he's 38th, maybe he's 46th. He's somewhere in there.
It goes without saying that on paper, that is one of the best contracts in the league today and one of the best free agent signings in NBA history. Because this season, he's the 52nd highest paid player in the league, and next season, he'll be 69th on that list, even though he's at least a top 20 player in the league. But in all fairness, the majority of NBA fans, myself included, did not expect Jalen Brunson to be this good. Before signing with them, Brunson was a number 2 option on the Mavericks, and even that was viewed as an overachievement for a second round pick who had spent most of his career coming off the bench. In his best season with Dallas, Brunson was not even viewed as a fringe all-star. In more ways than not, signing Brunson to a 9-figure deal looked like a classic Knicks move of overpaying players and putting their stock in mediocre NBA point guards or those who are past their prime. But every doubt that fans and critics had about Brunson being the guy that would elevate the Knicks seems to be a problem of the past. And that is another example of how the odds were stacked against him, only for him to surpass expectations. But like any true underdog, there's always a new hurdle that's put in his way as a reason why he can't get the job done.
Things that they're doing out there they shouldn't be doing. And Jalen is a perfect example. At the end of the day, they're like, oh, Allen Iverson, Steve Nash. I'm like, MVPs actually. MVPs of the league. They didn't win a championship. So yes, he is your 1A. And all I was saying is that I don't think you win a championship. It's not that he's not amazing. He's amazing.
The argument that Brunson can't be a 1A player just because he's a small guard, to me seems to be a bit of an unfair assessment because a 1A player is exactly what he's shown glimpses of being in his short time with the Knicks. I do understand that the comment was made in the context of winning championships, and Becky Hammon even gave some cases in NBA history of elite small guards who fell short of winning championships, but although it holds some truth, there have been other instances like Isaiah Thomas and Curry who won multiple championships. And even a guy like Chris Paul could possibly be a champion by now if it wasn't for his meltdowns, which have nothing to do with his size. But unlike Chris Paul, Brunson has shown that he rises to the occasion, as we saw in last year's playoff run against the Cavs and then against Miami, where he proved to be a problem for them with like 4 30-point games. All in all, the argument by Becky Hammon still sounds like a way of saying that Brunson can't get the job done, even with the right roster construction and team development, just because he doesn't have it in him and just because it's Jalen Brunson. Like a true underdog, he still has the odds stacked against him, even though he's proven time after time that he can achieve whatever looks to be out of reach as long as he's in the right situation. And if there's anything I've learned from sports, is that you can never count out the underdog with grit and passion, all of which Brunson embodies better than most.